The front door clicked shut behind her, and for a moment the house seemed suspended in an unnatural silence, as if it were holding its breath. Michael sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands gripping the worn leather armrests, staring at the empty hallway. The smell of her perfume lingered faintly, mingling with the scent of breakfast she hadn't cleaned up. A half empty cup of coffee, toast crumbs scattered across the counter. He tried calling her 3 times, no answer. Mom. Tommy's small voice trembled from the top of the stairs. The boy was 9, with his father's wide set eyes and a cautious, almost silent way of moving when he sensed tension. Mom, echoed Lily, 11, stepping into the living room. Her face was pale, her fingers curling nervously around the strap of her backpack. Michael looked at them, his chest tightening. She went out, he said, attempting lightness that cracked instantly. Just went out for a bit. Lily's lips quivered. But she didn't say anything. Not to me, not to Tommy. Michael began, and the words faltered. How could he tell them that their mother, their safe, dependable mother, had left with someone else? Someone from her office. Someone he had met only twice. The thought alone seemed impossible. Absurd. His stomach roiled. When the truth finally emerged after frantic calls to her phone, her office, even friends, he felt as if the floor had collapsed beneath him. She had packed a bag, left a note that was mercifully brief. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. The first week was a blur of shock, school pickups, and whispered questions from neighbours. The kids were quieter than usual, staring through windows, their small bodies coiled in confusion and grief. Michael tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, cooking meals he hadn't touched in years, going through the motions of homework, bedtime routines, always scanning for the door, expecting her to return with her usual warm smile, carrying milk or cookies. A reminder that life hadn't changed. But she never came back. Tommy stopped speaking for whole stretches of time. When he did, it was monosyllables, clipped, almost accusing. Lily, on the other hand, threw herself into schoolwork, music lessons, soccer practice, anything that could absorb her. At night, she cried softly into her pillow, careful not to wake her father, whose own nights were spent staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every glance, trying to decode where it had gone wrong. Friends offered support, some cautiously, others judgmentally. Didn't see this coming, a coworker asked, tilting their head. Sometimes these things you just don't know. Michael couldn't breathe through the weight of that disbelief. How had he been so blind? Their marriage had seemed solid, if quiet, comfortable, predictable, safe. He had never imagined that his wife could look at someone else and decide their family, him, the kids, the house they had built together wasn't enough. He found her social media account still active, filled with pictures of her laughing with him in the past, the kids in birthday photos, summer trips. Then newer pictures appeared. Her with him, but not Michael. Close, intimate, smiles that belonged to someone else. He felt sick, his chest tightening in waves that stole his breath. The children noticed the change in him, too. Where he used to be their rock, steady and certain. Now he flinched at small noises, snapped unexpectedly when their grief collided with his own, and often retreated to his study, closing the door and locking it. Not to punish them, but to hide the shaking in his hands. One evening, Lily approached him cautiously, a drawing in her hand. It was the family, drawn in bright colours, Michael in the centre, holding hands with both kids, but with an empty space where their mother should be. I miss her, Lily whispered. Her small voice carried a lifetime of hurt. I know, sweetie, Michael said, his throat thick. I miss her too. But the words felt hollow. He wanted to scream, to rage against her absence, against the unfairness of it all, against the reality that she had chosen someone else. Instead, he sat down, holding her close as tears he hadn't let himself shed for days finally broke through. Work became a sanctuary and a torment simultaneously. Colleagues offered sympathetic glances but avoided asking questions, as if verbalizing the situation could somehow make it more real. Michael was forced to navigate social interactions with the weight of judgment lurking in every smile and nod. Some whispered, he must have done something wrong. Others simply stared with pity. He learned quickly that grief and betrayal were isolating, especially when they were public in even the smallest ways. By the third week, reality had begun to settle into his bones. He started journaling at night, writing letters to her he would never send, cataloguing his anger and confusion. He took long walks with Tommy and Lily, attempting to stitch some stability into their lives. But every laugh, every smile from the kids was tinged with sadness, like light through smoke. At night, when the house was quiet, Michael would sit in her empty chair at the dining table, tracing the grain of the wood with his fingers, wondering if she had ever really loved him, or if the warmth he felt for her had been one-sided all along. The answer, he feared, would remain forever unknown. The first storm had passed, not gone, but dulled. And somewhere beneath the raw edge of grief, a small ember of determination flickered. Michael knew he had to survive, not just for himself, but for Tommy and Lily. Somehow, they had to keep going. Somehow, they had to become a family of three, scarred but unbroken. And he realized bitterly that part of surviving this betrayal would be learning to let go of the person he had thought he could trust most in the world. Winter came early that year, sharp and biting, matching the emptiness inside the house. Michael watched through frost-lined windows as the children trudged through the snow to school. Tommy's small shoulders were hunched, his gaze fixed on the ground. Lily, despite her attempts at composure, had dark circles under her eyes, the once bright spark in her gaze dulled by weeks of silent mourning. At school, the children's absence was noticed. Teachers asked questions. Friends whispered in hallways. Tommy had stopped answering most of them. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was often defensive or resentful. Lily tried to explain. She left, but we're okay, though even she didn't believe it. Their attempts to maintain appearances were fragile, like glass under pressure. At home, the house felt haunted. Every room reminded Michael of her. The couch cushion she always preferred, the faint perfume that clung to the bathroom towels, her favorite mug still on the counter. He moved through the rooms like a ghost, doing chores mechanically, speaking little. His parents offered to help, to stay a night or two, but he declined. This was his burden to bear. He thought of the children and what it would mean if he let strangers, or even family, step too far into their grief. Nighttime was the hardest. The house settled into silence, interrupted only by the soft breathing of children in beds they no longer shared with her. Michael would sit at the edge of their rooms, staring at the faint outlines of toys and drawings, imagining her presence there, imagining her laughter bouncing off the walls. Instead, he was met with the heavy, unrelenting absence she had carved out. Tommy began wetting the bed again, a regression that left Michael awake for hours, silently cleaning and reassuring him with words that felt hollow. Lily's music practice was erratic, her fingers on the piano keys producing sharp, jagged notes instead of the smooth melodies she once played. One evening, Michael listened as she sobbed into the piano, her back to him, refusing any comfort. "I can't do this," she whispered between sobs. "I can't. It's all wrong." "You're allowed to feel wrong," Michael said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. "This isn't fair. I know it's not." She didn't respond, only curled tighter, and he left the room quietly, swallowing his own tears. Work, too, became a minefield. Colleagues offered awkward smiles, avoidance, or pitying glances. Some people whispered behind his back, "Who leaves their family like that?" He knew she had already whispered her own version to friends and coworkers, painting herself as a victim of an unfeeling husband, leaving him with the unbearable shame of public judgment. He didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal or the subtle erosion of his social identity. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting morning at work, he walked into a meeting to find her name on everyone's lips. Not in gossip, at least not directly, but in sympathy-laced remarks and quiet glances. "I can't imagine what it's like for you," someone said, and he wanted to scream. "You have no idea." The children's questions began to intensify. "Why did she leave?" Tommy asked one evening, as Michael tucked him into bed. The boy's eyes brimmed with tears, but he refused to let them fall. Michael swallowed hard, gripping the sheets. "Sometimes adults make mistakes. Sometimes people make choices that hurt others, even the ones they love. Did I do something wrong?" "No, never you." Michael kissed his forehead. This isn't your fault. It's hers, not yours, not mine. But even as he said it, the words rang hollow. How could he explain that love could fracture, that trust could dissolve overnight, that the person you built a life with could find someone else more appealing, more exciting, more alive? Lily approached differently with quiet, simmering anger. She avoided him at times, slammed doors, muttered under her breath. She would snap at Tommy when he asked questions. One evening, she left the table mid dinner, throwing her utensils into the sink with a clatter. Michael sat frozen, heart in his throat. I hate her, she whispered later, retreating to her room. I hate her for leaving us like this. And I do too, Michael admitted quietly, his own voice catching. I do too, Lily. I do too. Months passed, and life slowly took on a new rhythm. Not a normal one, not the life they had imagined, but a rhythm nonetheless. Michael started therapy, first reluctantly, then as a lifeline. In those sessions, he learned to name his emotions: abandonment, betrayal, grief, anger, guilt. The therapist helped him recognize that his collapse at work, at home, in front of the children, was natural, and that survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about rebuilding. He enrolled Tommy in a local soccer league, not just for exercise, but to help him reconnect with joy, with peers who were oblivious to the family rupture. Lily began attending a youth music group where her talent was nurtured and admired, and where she could pour her anger and sadness into something constructive. Evenings remained difficult, but Michael started small traditions: hot chocolate on Friday nights, bedtime stories with silly voices, walks to the park where they could laugh, even if briefly, at the absurdity of frozen ducks in the pond. Through all of it, he learned to protect the children while also acknowledging his own brokenness. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to cry openly in front of them, not in despair, but in solidarity. The children, at first hesitant, slowly began to mirror his honesty. Tears became less of a burden and more of a bridge, connecting their grief instead of isolating it. One cold evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Michael sat alone on the porch, staring at the black sky. The wind whispered through the bare branches, carrying the echoes of what had been. He thought of her laughter, her smiles, the life they had shared, and let himself feel it fully, without anger, without hope, without expectation. It was in that quiet, painful honesty that he began to understand a new truth. Survival wasn't about revenge or resentment. It wasn't about erasing her from memory or pretending she had never existed. Survival was about building a new foundation, scarred but resilient, for himself and the children. And slowly, impossibly, he began to feel that ember inside him grow warmer. Spring arrived quietly, a fragile promise wrapped in pale sunlight and the scent of thawing earth. Michael noticed it first on the morning walks with the children. The air smelled different, lighter, as if the world itself had shrugged off winter's weight. Tommy kicked at the gravel path with unusual vigor, and Lily hummed a tune under her breath, a melody she had once abandoned after the months of grief. The house, too, began to feel different. Not whole, not untouched by the past, but lived in again. Michael painted the living room a warmer colour, replacing the furniture she had taken. He hung photographs of their small victories, a soccer game trophy, Lily's recital, a picture of the three of them at the park, smiling despite the ghosts that lingered at the edges of their joy. The children were changing too. Tommy spoke more, tentatively at first, then, with increasing confidence, he asked questions, not about their mother, not always, but about the world, about life, about him. Lily's anger softened into a protective, careful strength. She began helping Tommy with homework, checking on him when he faltered. They were forming a new rhythm, a life shaped not by what was lost, but by what they still had. Michael watched quietly, heart swelling with cautious pride. The absence of their mother had forced them to rely on each other in ways they never had before. They were fractured, yes, but unbroken. At work, Michael learned to navigate the subtle social minefield of post-betrayal life. Colleagues still glanced with curiosity, but the sting of judgment dulled over time. He realized he didn't need validation from them. His measure of success now rested on the small victories at home, the laughter of his children, the quiet moments of connection, the shared pride in their achievements. One evening, a friend from work asked, hesitantly, Do you forgive her? Michael paused. Forgiveness. The word felt strange on his tongue. He did not forgive her in the way that would erase the pain or the betrayal, but he could release its power over him. He could acknowledge that she had made her choices and that he and his children would continue forward regardless. Yes, he said finally softly, I forgive her, but for my own sake. For them. The children, too, were learning forgiveness in their own ways. Tommy no longer asked incessantly where she was. He stopped blaming himself for her absence. Lily still clenched her fists at the thought of her mother, but she no longer allowed it to shadow every part of her life. Slowly, subtly, they rebuilt their trust. Not in her, not in anyone else, but in each other, and in the constancy of what remained. On a Friday night, Michael sat on the sofa, the children sprawled around him with popcorn and blankets. They laughed over a silly movie, throwing light-hearted insults and playful jabs. The sound was imperfect, jagged in places, but it was life, real life. I like this, Lily said, resting her head against Michael's shoulder. Me too, he whispered, feeling the weight of months lift just enough to breathe freely. Me too. There were still moments of sorrow, still nights when he stared at the empty spaces and wondered what could have been. But grief no longer ruled the house. It had transformed, becoming a quiet awareness, a shadow that reminded them of the depth of their love, of what they had survived. Michael understood now that strength did not mean never breaking. It meant continuing to rise again and again, even when the weight of betrayal threatened to crush him. It meant holding the children tightly, letting them cry, letting them rage, letting them grow into versions of themselves untouched by bitterness. And in that strength, he found a measure of peace. Not the peace of forgetting or of returning to what was, but the peace of knowing that life, though changed forever, could still be full. The house was quieter at night now, but not empty. The laughter of the children, the warmth of small victories, and the hard-earned courage to face each day carried them forward. Michael knew the ember of resilience would never fully extinguish. It would flare unpredictably, sometimes bright, sometimes small, but always alive. The betrayal had left scars, yes. But from those scars, a new strength had grown. And for Michael, Tommy, and Lily, that strength was enough.